about 6 months here to really sort this out, to see which direction things are going to go. It's not much time, but that's my personal estimate. It could be out to 12. And then we're going to have some indicators and warnings of what direction this is going to go. But that's where I'd put it.
In the previous round, and this is a comment, but in the previous round, each of you had admitted that your best recommendation was to leave a residual force in Afghanistan. Clearly, the president disregarded that opinion, that recommendation, that advice, and I do believe that this has left us less safe. A number of my colleagues have mentioned over the horizon. General McKenzie, you referenced the fact that we don't know yet how effective that will be. We don't have partners on the ground. Talked about the airspace that would have to be used for over the horizon capabilities. There is still a terrorist threat in Afghanistan. Now, on August 20th, President Biden had stated, what interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone? First, I didn't recognize that al-Qaeda was gone. General McKenzie, is al-Qaeda gone?
Senator, al-Qaeda is still, it maintains a presence in Afghanistan.
And Secretary Blinken had said on August 22nd that the threat of terrorism metastasized out of Afghanistan a long time ago. General McKenzie, is there any terrorist threat in Afghanistan now?
What we see is ISIS newly rejuvenated with the prisoners that came out of Parwan and Polycharky prison. They're gathering their strength. We have yet to see how that's going to manifest itself, but we know for certainty that they do aspire to attack us in our homeland. And we know the same for al-Qaeda. So that threat, it has metastasized, and it is resident in other parts of the world. In my part of the world, though, it certainly is in Afghanistan.
Yes, it has been reported that the top 22 officials of the new Taliban government are known associates of al-Qaeda, including 5 terrorists who were once imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay and 13 more who were sanctioned by the UN, the United Nations, as terrorists post 9/11. And I'm very alarmed, Secretary Austin, that your Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl, claims there is a minimal threat. He called the terror threat from Afghanistan insignificant on a call with senators less than a month ago. He's wrong. I think all of you would admit he's wrong. The FBI director even said that he was wrong last week. He's in denial or he's lying. I would hope that his testimony and comments are not indicative of your own thoughts. And if they are different, I just truly hope they are. Let's just leave it at that. So if the Department of Defense can't get their lead policy official off the couch, which is where he told me he was during closed testimony last week, that he was sitting on the couch, he didn't really care what General Miller's opinion was. If that's the type of thought process that we put into decisions that are made at the Department of Defense with this lead policy official, maybe he needs to go back to the couch. I do think that there is still a threat in Afghanistan. I think we all need to acknowledge that, recognize it. Al-Qaeda is not gone. I hope we all make that very clear to the president, and we will have to have additional discussions about over the horizon as things develop in the upcoming months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Now let me recognize Senator Gillibrand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In continuing in my line of question from the first round, Secretary Austin and General Milley, are you aware of any internal audits that are being conducted within the Department of Defense on the execution of the war over the last 20 years?
I am not, other than the AAR activity that we will conduct within the department.
What's that?
After action review.
And what will that what will make up that review?
We'll focus on you know, the things that have occurred as a part of this latest operation. But I think your initial question was, is there a review over the last 20 years? And the answer to that is no. So.
And do you think a review of broad scope would be useful to the DoD and useful to policymakers in the future, particularly this committee?
I do, Senator, and I also think, as I mentioned earlier, that that should have an interagency flavor as well.
And do you have any recommendations for an external independent review of the war in Afghanistan? For example, what do you think Congress's role should be, and how would such an audit be conducted? What U.S. agencies, countries, and organizations should be included in the review of America's longest war?
Yeah, I don't have any recommendations at this point. I can certainly take that for the record, Senator.
I would be grateful for that. Secretary Austin and General Milley, this is something that hits a little closer to home. A number of our diplomats, intelligence officers, and service members who assisted with evacuation, including the 10th Mountain Division from Fort Drum, New York, were subjected to acute trauma and chronic stress, a problem we are not unfamiliar with after the last 20 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Families at Fort Drum have told my office it felt like a full deployment compressed into the time of a few weeks. Further, so many of our service members have lost their lives to suicide, which has been devastating. What is DoD doing to ensure that our combat veterans and their families are getting adequate mental health assessment and the resources they need?
Well, thanks, Senator. I'll make a comment, and I'll let General Milley comment as well. I think you asked him as well, but you've heard me say before that, my belief is that mental health is health, period. And there should be no stigma associated with seeking help if you're dealing with issues. And I've encouraged the entire force, all of our leadership, to make sure that, number one, we have adequate resources available for our troops and our families, and number two, that they destigmatize the issue of assisting help with mental health issues.
Senator, as you know, I commanded the 10th Mountain Division as well as Secretary Austin at one point. And that division is one of the most deployed divisions, along with the 101st Airborne Division out of Senator Blackburn's state. And there's significant mental health capability there to help the soldiers that were on this non-combatant evacuation. And they'll get immediate assessments upon redeployment. It's the normal procedure. And then those that need counseling, it's there. The key that we have to do is emphasize a culture of non-stigmatizing any sort of mental health issues that a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine have, and so that they feel free, they can seek out the counseling we have available.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the line of questioning that Senator Ernst started. Can you describe for us the al-Qaeda threat today, where it's located, where you believe it will be going, what the strength is compared to the strength over the last 20 years? And please answer the same question for ISIS, ISIS-K, and other variations of ISIS across the world.
You're asking me, Senator?
Yes, General Milley first, and then Secretary Austin.
So first, I think it would be good to handle it in some detail in the classified session, but in an unclassified session, I would say that the al-Qaeda threat globally is still there. The threat in Afghanistan has an opportunity now to potentially reconstitute, although it's been ripped apart pretty steadily over 20 years. And al-Qaeda has displaced other parts of the world with their affiliates in East Africa, for example, Al-Shabaab or AQAP down in Yemen, also in the Maghreb, etc. So there's several affiliates worldwide, some of which are quite capable and definitely have aspirations to attack the United States. With respect to ISIS, we saw ISIS core in Iraq and Iraq and all that. That was all ripped apart, but they still exist up there, by the way. And ISIS has found a new home in parts of Afghanistan, although right now they're at war essentially with the Taliban. But ISIS has affiliates as well in other parts of the world because of their brutality. So there are other regions of the world which have high concentrations of very lethal terrorist organizations that have aspirations to conduct operations against the United States. And we have operations in intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, et cetera, in all of those parts to continue to watch that. But it has moved in various parts, and we can cover that in some detail in a classified session, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pursue both questions for both in classified setting.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley and General McKenzie, I ran out of time before I could thank you for some of the work that your staff did in August. We were working several cases. I was involved. I remember a conversation with one of your staff, General McKenzie, at about 3 o'clock in the morning while we were trying to shepherd someone out, and we did get them out successfully along with some American citizens. But unfortunately, we have a much longer list of people that we were not successful with getting out between SIV holders and family members. My office alone has over 900 people still on a list of people who are still in Afghanistan. And we communicate with these people through WhatsApp. We were trying to shepherd them to HKIA and then back and forth, and ultimately operations were shut down and they were stranded and left behind. So what role, and Secretary Austin, maybe I'll start with you, what role, if any, and actually before I answer that on the mental health issue, we were working with a Marine who was trying to get an interpreter out, had been maintaining contact for years. We had all the authenticating documentation. We weren't successful in that case. That Marine committed suicide about 3 weeks ago, retired Marine. So this is having real life consequences, not only in Afghanistan, but here in the United States. So Secretary Austin, what role, if any, does the DOD play in helping us draw down this list of people that we believe we have documentation that suggests they should somehow get shepherded out of Afghanistan?
Senator, first of all, my deepest condolences on the loss of our Marine. Really saddened to hear that. Thoughts and prayers to his families. DOD continues to work as a part of the cell that you may have heard me mention earlier. That's actually run or headed up by the State Department, and Ambassador John Bass is running that. And we're trying to pull in as much information from every corner that we can and refine lists and refine contact information so that we can reach out and make sure that people have the right credentials to be able to leave the country. And so we continue to work with as a part of the state effort on this issue. So.
I think it'd be helpful to find out what our point of contact was. It was literally me reaching somebody to see if they could help me, or moving it up the chain of command to where I was able to personally intervene in several cases. General Milley and General McKenzie, some people have said we're glad that we've ended this war. Is the war on terror over? General Milley?
Absolutely not.
General McKenzie?
The war on terror is not over, and the war in Afghanistan is not over either.
Has the exit from Afghanistan made the war more challenging for us or less challenging with respect to continuing to try and protect the homeland and U.S. interest abroad?
Senator, this made it more challenging.
General Milley, you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
A related note, a Wall Street Journal article published on August 31st said U.S. officials acknowledged the military has lost 90% of the intelligence collection capabilities it had using drones before the drawdown. Do you agree with that?
I didn't see the report. It said, say again what it said?
It said we have lost 90% of our intelligence collection capabilities it had using drones before the drawdown.
I'd have to go look at the actual math. I've got my J2 actually doing that right now to determine the level of ISR assets and the statistics. It is significant. I don't know if it's 90%, but it's...
On the SIVs and folks that are stranded in Afghanistan, is it fair to say that our human intelligence network, given the current status and the fact that many were left behind, is it fair to say that that's been stressed even more so than our drone surveillance capabilities? I mean, do we have much in the way of human intelligence on the ground in Afghanistan today?
We can explain that, I think, in good detail in a classified session, but there is still, yes.
Do we also, back to General or Secretary Austin, I think it's so important for us to show that we're going to move heaven and earth to try and get these others out of Afghanistan, because this not only has an impact in Afghanistan, it has an impact anywhere. You know, SIVs are not unique to Afghanistan. People working with us, human intelligence on the ground, keeping our forces safe is something that's standard operating procedure in a lot of dangerous areas. So I hope that we recognize that we owe it to the people of Afghanistan, but we owe it to our men and women in uniform to get this right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Now let me recognize Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, our military executed a massive operation during the month of August. As I understand it, it was larger than the Berlin airlift. For the record, can you just tell us how many Americans you evacuated?
Almost 6,000. I can get your precise number for the record, but it's about 6,000.
Let's get the right number for the record, but that's helpful. And how many people in total did the U.S. and coalition forces evacuate?
124,000 total, 44,000 went out on non-US aircraft. The rest came out on US aircraft.
Okay, an extraordinary effort, but still, it's hard to get everyone out.
Largest airlift in history.
Right. Hard to get everyone out. One problem, of course, is that there were so many Afghan SIV applicants in Kabul waiting to be evacuated because the Trump administration had essentially shut the program down. Withdrawal was a massive operation conducted in a chaotic, unpredictable environment, and some people have criticized you for leaving on August 31st, but I just want to explore that for a minute. General Milley, once the Afghan government collapsed in August, would you say that staying past the date of their collapse would have exposed the force on the ground to substantial additional risk?
Yes, and that is exactly what we assessed, that if we stayed past the 31st, the risk to force, U.S. military casualties, the risk to the mission, the ability to continue to execute a NEO, and most importantly, the risk to the American citizens that are still there was going to go to, we assessed, very high levels, and we thought that that was a level of risk that was unacceptable.
Okay, and just so I'm sure, and everybody's got this on the record, so if we'd stayed another week or 2 or 3, then it's likely there would have been another attack that killed American service members. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that that is a near certainty.
All right. For years, we poured money into the Afghan government, and for years, we trained their army, we outfitted them with all the best American equipment, we provided them with overwhelming air power. Even so, both the Afghan government and the army collapsed almost instantaneously. So, General Milley, let me ask you, given how quickly the Afghan government and the Afghan army collapsed, do you think that either or both would have been able to stand on their own with just another few months or another few years of American assistance and training?
I think at this point that's unknowable, but my estimate at the time was if you kept advisors there, kept money flowing, et cetera, that we probably could have sustained them for a lengthy or indefinite period of time. Whether or not you would have had a different result at the end of the day, that's a different question.
You know, when I hear you say that, it reminds me of all the years that I've sat now on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and how many times the generals have come in front of us, and when you point out every way in which the Afghan government was failing and the Afghan army was failing, the generals respond with, but we're turning the corner now.
I didn't say we're turning the corner, Senator. I said we could sustain them.
And that we would be able to keep them, and somehow when we got ready to withdraw, they would be so well sustained that they would not have collapsed instantaneously the way they did after 20 years of sustenance and training.
Well, I think the end state probably would have been the same no matter when you did it.
Well, you know, I believe that leaving a force behind would have necessitated that force staying indefinitely.
That's right.
And many of those service members would have been exposed to unnecessary risk and harm.
That's exactly right.
We agree. And I also just want to say, this week we will have our 5th hearing on Afghanistan in the 8 months since President Biden took office. During the Trump years, as the Afghan government and the Afghan army racked up one failure after another, the Republicans seem far less interested in this topic, holding one public hearing a year. The Republicans' sudden interest in Afghanistan is plain old politics. It is not the kind of oversight that we should have been exercising in years past. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to my colleague's statement, it's a little bit rich coming from one of my colleagues on this committee who wants to gut the military and its readiness. So, but that's a whole nother issue. I want to get back to my line of questioning from this morning, and I will tell you again, gentlemen, I've never seen so much anger, at least from my constituents, who've witnessed a fiasco, a humiliation, a president who is consistently telling falsehoods to the American people, and the issue there's no accountability. And you gentlemen have spent decades serving your country honorably in combat. I have the utmost respect for your service, your fidelity to America. And importantly, you've dedicated your lives to an institution that has a culture of strict accountability and responsibility up and down the ranks. I mentioned a few examples this morning. the collisions of the USS McCain and Fitzgerald, everybody up and down the ranks, including the 3-star admiral, was relieved. The recent very tragic Marine AAV accident, everybody up and down the ranks, including the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, was relieved. If you're a Marine or Army 2nd Lieutenant training your platoon on patrol and one of your soldiers loses his NVGs or his rifle, that lieutenant is going to get relieved. But on this issue, one of the biggest national security fiascos in a generation, no one is accountable. And the American people are livid because they saw it, they see it, they know it's a debacle. General Milley, this morning you called the Afghan retrograde a logistical success, but quote, a strategic failure. I appreciate your honest assessment. I believe the President of the United States is solely responsible for this. Mr. Secretary, do you know if anyone, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, or Undersecretary for Policy of DoD has offered their resignation to take responsibility for this fiasco?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not, but I don't believe they have.
Okay, thank you. Given the military culture of accountability that all of you gentlemen come from, and again, I respect that more than almost anybody, have any of you offered your resignation to the President at any time since his decision to withdraw? And General Milley, I understand your earlier answer to this question, that senior military advisors and officers can't resign every time they disagree with the President. I actually agree with that. But after the President's decision, when the American people see such a strategic failure, as you called it, that's undermining our national security, they expect accountability, and there has been none. So have any of you accepted that accountability or responsibility?
Before there's an answer, I want to weigh in on this right here, first of all. The administration before Biden's administration was the ones that set all this stuff up. They had already pre-planned with the Taliban towards how and what was going to happen and when. With Biden's plate, and I'm not trying to cover up for Biden at all, but with Biden's plate being so full towards COVID and everything else going on, and the migrants, illegal migrants down on the border, and trying to get money to weigh out pertaining to our infrastructure and etc. I don't foresee it as it just being one person's fault. I foresee it as it being a whole group of people who is associated with these decisions on the upper levels of this. They keep calling it a debacle. I don't even know that a debacle is the right pronunciation for what went on. Especially whenever you're talking about leaving over $80 billion worth of equipment over there. Or that's what somebody estimated. I don't know if that's true or not. But the fact of the matter is, we cannot, as a society here in America, pertaining to our democracy, continue to use our presidencies either as show horses if everything's going good, and use them as scapegoats when everything is going bad. Because the fact of the matter is, when everything is going good, odds are it probably took a whole team of people to wrap their minds around whatever issues was going on during that time to make things go good. The same thing with the things going bad. It had to have been not only Biden's administration, but the previous administration that obviously didn't tell the whole truth to the new administration that was coming in power, and because of it, the ball got bounced. Somebody dropped the ball. So you can't just blame one individual. And I realize the buck stops here pertaining to the President of the United States, and in theory speaking, that's correct. That's very correct. But whenever it comes to reality speaking, how many people could have sat down with Biden, let's say within a month after he had become president, or 2 months after the dust kind of settled, and said, Mr. Biden, this is what we advise our advisors to do towards the agreement that's went on in the past, and we wanted to run it by you just to see how you felt about it. And they needed to spend about a half a day to possibly a day or longer in the office with Mr. Biden towards explaining to him everything that had been promised, everything that was on the table, and everything that they was looking forward to happening in the future. I don't know that meeting ever took place between upper levels of authority figures. I don't know that meeting ever took place. And because it didn't take place, things was running inadequate. And of course, the proof is in the pudding whenever you get to looking at what actually occurred towards a rush exiting out of that area. That basically, I'm really surprised that no more than 13 got killed. I'm really surprised that it wasn't possibly hundreds, if not more, that would have wound up getting killed during that episode. Because whenever you're transfigurating from being involved in war, from all of a sudden now you're escaping that combat zone, there's all kinds of nut jobs out there. There's all kinds of people that think their own thoughts, that have their own creative imaginations about what has went on, what will go on, and to hold that down to a level of decency to me is absolutely remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable that they got something like over 100,000 people out in the time frame that they did. Absolutely remarkable. There's no doubt mistakes was made. And it wasn't just the mistakes towards leaving the equipment. They're unintended and not destroyed. There was mistakes made. But who made the mistakes? That's what they're trying to do here. That's what this hearing is all about here, pertaining to the who, the what, the when, and the why. And I don't have no idea towards how these generals are going to answer this question. I guess they're generals right up underneath the president, pertaining to the CIA, the Pentagon. I have no earthly idea because I haven't watched this far. So let's hear what their answer is.
I'm accountable for my actions. And
No, I'm just talking about a resignation.
I have not submitted my letter of resignation.
Mr. Secretary?
No.
General?
I have not submitted a letter of resignation.
Mr. Secretary, I want to know, what will it take for someone, anyone in the Biden administration to take responsibility or accountability for this national security fiasco? Anyone?
Senator, from a DOD perspective, again, you heard me say that we'll continue to review our actions, and we won't hesitate to be critical of ourselves. And if there's someone that should be held accountable for an action, then we'll certainly do that.
I want to switch topics here very quickly. General Milley, do you think if the Chinese Communist Party decided to invade Taiwan, would their military leadership call and give you a heads up?
I think there'd be a period of increased tension, indicators and warnings, and I think there'd be an exchange of various communications at all levels. Department
You really
of State,
think the
and I
Chinese-
think
You really think the Chinese Communist Party head of the PLA would call and say, "Hey, General, FYI, we're going to get ready to invade Taiwan. I just thought I'd give you a heads up." Honestly think that?
I know I'd call him and ask him.
No, I'm
I would call
asking
him
the
and
other
ask him
question.
outright.
You think he'd give you a heads up
I think
on the
that,
invasion of Taiwan?
I think an invasion of Taiwan would be a fairly obvious thing to pick up on.
No, I didn't, but that's not what I asked. Let me ask a related question.
Sure.
I think the answer to that is no. I think if the head of the PLA called you and said, "Hey, we're getting ready to invade Taiwan," and Xi Jinping found out about it, he'd be shot. But let me ask a related question. You said you were, quote, certain that President Trump did not intend on attacking China. That's what you just said.
That's correct.
Yet you're quoted in the Woodward book as telling the top Chinese Communist military commander, quote, "If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time." Is that true, General Milley?
Well, let me tell you what I actually said.
Well, that's not true. I hope that's
Let me tell you what I actually said, Senator. What I said, if there's going to be a war, if there's going to be an attack, there's going to be a lot of calls and tension ahead of time.
But what
you're going to get called. You're going to get called.
Your testimony was that you were
Senator,
certain President Trump would not attack. That's your testimony this morning.
That is true. That is
Okay, then why
absolutely
would
true.
you?
And I was communicating to my Chinese counterpart on instructions, by the way, to de-escalate the situation. And I told him that we are not going to attack. President Trump has no intent to attack. And I told him that repeatedly. And I told him if there was going to be an attack, there'll be plenty of communications going back and forth. Your intel system's going to pick it up. I said, I'll probably call you. Everybody will be calling you. We're not going to attack you. Just settle down. It's not going to happen. And I did it twice, in October and January.
I think
you,
if
Senator.
you're giving a heads up to the Chinese Communist Party,
I didn't give them a heads up we're going to attack because we weren't going to attack.
If we're
I was
going
telling
to
them we were
attack,
not
I'm
going to
gonna
attack,
call you
which was
ahead
being
of
time.
faithful
Sullivan.
to the President of the United States' intent.
Time
I
expired.
was being faithful to his intent, Senator.
Thank you very much. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, in your confirmation hearing, you spoke focusing on our shared interest with Pakistan. A readout from your August call with Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff contained some similar language that you expressed. My question to you, could you please elaborate for this committee on what you view as our shared interest with Pakistan today? And I'm particularly interested in how this relates with the Pakistani government's relationship with the Taliban, now that the Taliban are in power in Afghanistan.
Well, thanks, Senator. I think that one key shared interest is the prevention of a humanitarian disaster in Afghanistan or in the region. And so I think we'll continue to share that interest. I do think there is some intersection in terms of certain types of terrorist activity that I think we can both remain focused on. Again, an in-depth conversation about Pakistan probably would be better suited in a closed hearing there. So.
Very well. I understand that there were certain airplanes, helicopters, and ground vehicles that were disabled as forces left and as the Afghan forces were overrun. And right now, I don't want to talk about the operability of a Humvee or a MRAP or the pictures we saw of Taliban sitting on grounded C-130s. What concerns me more is the potential for our strategic adversaries to have some time and space to examine the technology inside those vehicles to find vulnerabilities. And even if a system has been disabled, in some ways destroyed, reverse engineering can still be used on those systems and can provide information to sophisticated adversaries that may get a hold of this. And as all of you know, we harden our supply chains to protect military technology. It's a matter of national security. So my question for you, Secretary Austin, is the department now conducting an extensive counterintelligence assessment of equipment to get a sense of what might be reverse engineered, and how do we protect against any use of that information against our forces?
I want to weigh in again right here. First of all, I think our American politicians over here realizes that what has happened here, it isn't as easy as walking away from a back alley brawl towards two people getting into a fight and one deciding that the licks or the hateful activities that goes along with a fight was over, to the point that just one turned around and walked out from the fight, not using any type of force of violence. This is going to affect the people over in Pakistan. This is going to affect the people over in southern China. This is going to affect people over in other parts of the country in that area. And I think our politicians know this, And they're really reaching for straws right now towards trying to find somebody that will hold the end of the bargain towards accountability issues. That way they'll have another scapegoat to go to say, oh, it wasn't our fault, it was this man's fault. In other words, they realize the severity of what has happened here. Now, getting to the next question or statement that was made pertaining to the equipment and pertaining to the high-tech equipment that was on board on some of that equipment that can be used against us. It was brought to my attention as of last week through an unknown source that I can't mention that if the people over there couldn't or didn't have the assets and the intent towards going to war in the war of all wars pertaining to the war that it talks about in the Bible, that if they didn't have capability of doing that before, that now they most definitely do. If that leads you in any direction towards the severity of how that we walked out of there. Once more, I don't see that it can be blamed on one particular person. You got to go to the party. And that's what they're questioning right now. And if the truth be known pertaining to what has occurred here, probably all three of these men should walk away and resign. As far as Mr. Biden, I'm going to leave that for the history books towards what should or shouldn't be done. But the fact of the matter is, and I want you to hear this very clearly, the fact of the matter is the way that this was all set up, it was set up just exactly as a setup. It was set up through the administration of Donald Trump that basically led an entrapment that if things was not handled right down to the T, this is exactly what that administration was hoping for towards a big blow up, a big screw up, a big mess up. And it's almost, and I don't know that I don't know that it was intentionally done, but it's almost as if Donald Trump set a trap, an entrapment for this administration to be looked upon as being the bad guys if things was not handled right down to the T. Once more, you got to go back to that administration and you got to find out who was in charge, who knew the plans, who was part of that agreement, and then you got to go from there towards who didn't initiate that agreement and how come it wasn't done in stages the way that other people believes that it should have been done. Instead of this massive exiting within just a few days. That's my analogy of this. The same way of the analogy towards the way that Donald Trump set, once more I'm going to use that word, set up a great deal of the weak-minded people that couldn't see through what Donald Trump was trying to do towards leading them on and baiting them up in thinking that what they was involved in doing was a patriotic duty thing towards going to the Capitol building January the 6th and basically raising 19 kinds of hell. Donald Trump and his administration should be forced upon to the American people towards giving an account towards how that they led people down this road of entrapment up until the last minute that Donald Trump himself said, well, I'll be there with you. Well, we didn't see him go to the Capitol building. And if he was talking metaphorically, how come he didn't explain himself that I'll be there in gesture, or I'll be there in spirit, or I'll be there in heart, metaphorically speaking? He led them people to believe that he was going to be there. And he was pointing his finger directly at Pence, towards saying if Pence does the right thing, indicating that he himself had put Mr. Pence on a pedestal, that Mr. Pence had to choose between the lesser of the two evils. And of course, we see which way Mr. Pence went. He went towards according to the plans of the body. And now, since they have done thorough investigations on supposedly the voting fraud, the way that I understand it, the biggest majority of all the states that claim one thing are still claiming the same thing today. That Donald Trump lost in that state. And I'm just going to use the state of Arizona for a quick illustration, because I think it's been counted something like 5 different times. God only knows that the money, the time, the effort, the energy that it took to do all this. But it has been proven again and again and again that Donald Trump lost the election. We knew before the election, the way that Donald Trump was throwing himself around, that he wasn't going to be a fair player, that he was going to be a sore loser, and that the possibility towards him actually showing his you-know-what, the way that he showed himself and displayed himself before the American people, we knew that that was a possibility towards him doing just exactly what he done. And he went ahead and done it anyway. Now, whenever you get to talking about accountability issues, you have to go back to the core of origin towards where it all began to begin with. Who was the one that got up there and led all these people in believing that the election had been thrown? Donald Trump. Who's the one that made the agreement with the Taliban and started this procedure towards the Americans walking out and basically supposedly letting the Afghan army and the Afghan government reside in their own country and take care of their own affairs? Donald Trump done this. You got to go back to the original core of origin. And if you're not, well, then the whole system ain't worth a darn. But in the agreements between this man and the other 2 men that they got on trial right now, or in this hearing right now, somebody dropped the ball in communications, and I don't know if it was administration number 1 that didn't talk to administration number 2, or administration number 2 that didn't feel like talking to administration number 1, but somebody obviously dropped the ball, because this was one of the most disheartening, gut-wrenching events in the 21st century that the world has ever sat back and watched, towards the way that we done this massive exiting. And I didn't know until just now that they're saying that it's almost 1,000 people that's still over there that was associated with the American sympathizers that was working with the American government over there pertaining to the Afghanistan people. I didn't realize that it was that many people. So yeah, there's a big mistake. And guess what? Before it's all over with, it's going to affect that whole region. And they know it. Our politicians know it. And you have to ask yourself another question. Okay, if they're the politicians that's over the CIA, if they're the politicians that's involved with these administrations, how come they allowed for this to happen the way that it happened towards accountability issues? I mean, if you're going to point the finger, let's point the finger in the right direction. But keep in mind, as you're pointing that finger, you got one finger pointing out and you got another 3 pointing back at you whenever it goes to finger pointing. So you need to make sure that the perpetrator that you're pointing the finger at, that he or she is in fact the one that you want to be pointing the finger at. It's this whole thing was in fact, I guess, on a big scale, on a big level, pertaining to it being a debacle. On a smaller scale, it was just a total mix-up, mess-up, to the point of nobody communicating with nobody. And how come somebody didn't sit down with a plan of action and say, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. Point A, point B, point C. we're going to get through this, and then after we get through that, we're going to do this. After we get through that point B, then we're going to turn to point C. In other words, we're going to take things out in steps, in different levels. And then finally, whenever it's all said and done with, we're going to leave. The last man standing is going to be the American soldier walking into the plane backwards with his machine gun in his hand, double dog daring anybody to take a fire at him as we're leaving the point of entry, exiting that whole scenario over there.
We will continue to assess what's exploitable, Senator. I would flag for you that all of this equipment is not high-end equipment. Again, the equipment that we had for our use was retrograded as General Miller drew down the retrograded equipment and drew down our forces. I would also like to flag for you, sir, that while the number $84 billion has been bounced about quite a bit, that's the number that we invested in Afghan security forces over a 20-year period of time, and less than 20% of that was dedicated towards Afghan equipment. Most of that money was focused on sustainment and salaries and those types of things.
General McKenzie, if you could go back in time and change one thing about the strategy in the last 6 months of operations in Afghanistan, which could have alleviated some of the chaos that we saw at the end, what would it be?
In the last 6 months, Senator would, of course, infer that decisions made were going to zero. I think I go back to, could we have gotten more people out earlier in the process? By that I mean U.S. citizens. And I know the embassy put out at least a dozen notices to U.S. citizens to leave. I know that the ambassador is very aggressive on that. I would have liked to maybe have seen done more there, more done in that regard. Additionally, perhaps to try to get more of the SIV population out. But Senator, I think we need to recognize that if you're asking the Afghans to fight and at the same time you're bringing out the best and the brightest, that's clearly a conflicting message that you're sending them. So I don't say that lightly or recognize there wouldn't be inherent risk in taking that course of action.
So there would have been risk doing those things.
There would have been, in my judgment, yes, but that's a way that we could have, could have been more forceful with our own citizens, although, there are very strict limitations on what you can say or do to an American citizen abroad for good reason. So I think, you got to trust the good judgment of the people, of the American citizens that are in Afghanistan.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Pickett. Senator Kramer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary,
and it's pretty obvious that the morale that the American forces was banking on was not there. This is where they was hoodwinked. This is where they was deceived. They thought that they could depend upon to the Afghanistan citizens towards the initiative, towards having the morale to get in there and fight for their country and fight for their countrymen, and they failed in that assessment towards the Afghanistans not having the will, not having the wind in their sail to fight for themselves. This is where the American government was bamboozled. This is what created the fiasco that we have all witnessed, that has turned into basically an embarrassing mockery of how that this all occurred and all this fell out to begin with. And of course, in my behalf, I don't just look at the tail end of the 20 years, I look at the front end of the 20 years towards what initiated this. Of course, we know it was 9/11. We know it was bin Laden. Well, after they got bin Laden, how come we stayed in there? How come we initiated some sort of a nation building deal? Did we think that this was going to be the betterment of the good out of all this? I mean, whenever it comes to conforming people, and I've said this about our own people over here in America that's been asphyxiated either on drugs or alcohol, you cannot do it from a Band-Aid cosmetic perspective. Whenever it comes to reforming somebody, it has to begin from the inside out. Because Christ talked about the cup, and he said to deal with the inside of the cup, and then the outside of the cup would take care of itself. Well, if you don't have your heart, if you don't have your mind, if you don't have your soul right with God towards overcoming these issues, regardless whether it's the issue of some of the American problems or the issue towards people being blinded, towards allowing for the Sharia law to take over their land, the very thing that the Saudi Arabians promote and put on a pedestal. If you don't start from the inside, working on the outside of the cosmetic cup, putting band-aids on something, trying to change the color of a giraffe into a color of an ostrich isn't going to work. And I think, if anything, that's probably one of our biggest failures, is that we spent so much time, so much energy, so much sacrificing of human beings' life for it now to all blow up in our faces. Well, once more, let's go even further back than that, and let's go back to 1988, whenever Ronald Reagan was still president, that all of a sudden we started promoting out of one side of our mouths, peace, 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 to the superpowers. But then, on the other side of our mouth, we decided to go after Saddam Hussein, that began Desert Storm and Desert Shield, that stirred up a bunch of freaking emotions and stirred up a bunch of freaking crazy people to begin with over there. And if the truth be known, because of what happened during Desert Storm and Desert Shield helped to initiate the blow pertaining to 9/11 in our international foreign affairs. Once more, the government of the United States should have initiated the peace concept more than the war concept. They didn't want peace. That's the reason why I continue to keep saying again and again and again, and it's not just the people right here in the area where I live in Northwest Tennessee towards me putting out all the material that I put out for years and years and years, but it began at the core. It began at the White House. That if they truly believed in what that they was telling everybody else towards ending of the Cold War, ending of the falling of the Berlin Wall, how come they didn't initiate it? And guess what? The rest of the world is scratching their heads towards asking the same questions that I'm asking. Well, if they claim that that's supposed to be something to do with Bible prophecy, if they claim that it's supposed to be doing something pertaining to the opening of the first seal and the two witnesses, how come the Windmill Ministries missions never did get a congregation or never did it get a support team to support them and to back them? That's what the rest of the world is asking. How come the double standard? You talk about peace. They convinced the superpowers that the world wasn't going to be destroyed by man, but that it was going to be destroyed by God according to the teachings of the Bible. But yet no, they did not initiate that. What did they initiate? They initiated just the very opposite, which was Desert Storm and Desert Shield. That transparently was obvious that instead of the Americans actually being committed to peace, it looked to me like that they was becoming committed to war over whatever reasons pertaining to Saddam Hussein, in which he never did have no mass destructions of artillery over there pertaining to nuclear warfare. But for whatever reason, it gave a signal that, wow, they talk about peace, but what we're seeing in reality is a bunch of warmongers that wanted to supposedly go over to the Middle East in the Iraqi war. I hope that I got that right. Pertaining to trying to rid evil from the axis of evil and to bring stability to that region. Wow. So this was the way that we was going to do it. We wasn't going to do it the authentic, righteous God way, but now we're going to do it our way. Well, one thing led to another, and another thing led to another. And I can go down a big long track pertaining to the history of myself towards how individuals was set out towards trying to destroy me by trying to put me on a pedestal at first towards being a maniac, and then they changed their tactics, and now all of a sudden in 2005 right here in my own home county towards trying to make me out to be a homegrown terrorist. That snowballed up into Kentucky towards once more trying to make me out to be a homegrown terrorist. That once more snowballed and went into another atmosphere or another state over in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that once more tried to make me out to be a homegrown terrorist. See, a lot of times people does things subconsciously speaking, and they don't have no idea why they're doing it. Because what they're doing, they bring it subjective to the spirit that's telling them to do what they're doing. All these different law enforcement agencies was trying to destroy the founder of the Windmill Ministries in any form or fashion. It meant everything in the world towards them, towards bringing this guy down, to the extent that I come back here to live with my brother in 2014, and now all of a sudden the very same people that throwed a monkey in the works in 2005, now they come after me again, knowing that the whole time my brother and I was trying to defend our rights and defend our property out here at 291 and at 430 Beach Grove Road. I know what went on. Spiritual warfare. I know why they wanted to take me out. They didn't want me to tell the story. And they didn't want me to be productive in the calling that the Heavenly Father had called me into towards me not fulfilling my purpose. I know these things. Now, whether or not anybody else wants to believe them, that's going to be up to them. But I'm telling you right now, I know where they flubbed up at. I know the core of origin. You got to dig a little deeper, go a little wider, find out what really went on up there in the White House. In the meantime, you got this individual such as myself that's out here popping up ever so often. I'll pop up over here and they'll beat me down, and I'll pop up over here. I'll get on a radio station. Will I lose my job? I'm threatened, and I pop up over here. Will I get banned from this church? Then I pop up over here, get banned from that church. I cannot even go into the very church to this day that I know of, unless they've had a change of heart, that's probably valued at well over $25 million down in Jackson, Tennessee, pertaining to the real estate and the building and what type of setup that it is down there. I'm not even allowed to go down there, even though I spent over a year and a half, almost 2 years, working on it and building on it towards ever putting it up to begin with. Now, how insane is that? You would think anybody that had a part in building that church, they'd treat them like a guest of honor whenever they walked in. It didn't matter it didn't matter if you was a bricklayer, electrician, plumber, carpet layer, concrete, metal man, iron worker, whatever. You'd think that body of people down there that has that church would be grateful enough that whoever come in there into their presence that had anything to do with building that building, that they treat them like an honored guest, not like a terrorist, not the way that I was treated, give or take about 2 or 3 years ago whenever I went down there in First Baptist Church in Jackson, Tennessee in Madison County.
Austin, why did the committee not get the testimony for today until 10:35 last night? Were you guys not prepared?
We were prepared, and again, I don't know the specifics of what last minute adjustments were being made at what level, but we were prepared.
Well, it must not have been a level below you then, or you'd be aware of it, right? So it would have to be a level above you. In other words, did the White House withhold your testimony? General Milley, did you have your testimony done before 10:35 last night?
We did, but the White House wasn't withholding my testimony, no.
Who was?
Nobody. I mean, you have to submit, when you submit written documents, as you well know, you have to submit them to OMB.
Right.
They reviewed them in the afternoon. We got them back, I don't know, 1900, something like that. And then we made the changes and submitted them. And yes, we were late.
But it wasn't you.
No,
It was
wasn't
OMB.
any
Okay.
intent to block.
Yeah. It was somebody's strategy, is my guess. Just might not have been yours, but it clearly was somebody's. General McKenzie, about a half hour ago, you said, we know for certain ISIS intends to attack us at home, or something to that effect, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So 20 years ago on September 11th, when the terrorist hijackers took over 4 aircraft and attacked the homeland, all of them came here on a visa, correct? Now, in the last 20 years, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, they haven't acquired ICBMs or a Navy or an Air Force as far as we know. So if they're going to carry out that intent, they're going to have to get here themselves. And that means either through a visa program or as refugees across the southern border. My question to all of you is, isn't national security tied directly to good immigration security? And do you feel like we're adequately prepared to protect the homeland from visa holders and refugees?
Senator, in the case of ISIS, I think we've done a remarkable job over the last 2 decades about hardening the entry process and making it very difficult for them to get their agents into the United States. And that's a matter of record just based on performance. The same thing with AQ. The larger discussion about immigration, I defer to the Secretary and the Department.
Well, I would submit to you that as good as the work's been done in the last 20 years, the last 6 or 7 months, it's been pretty well degraded, I would say. Others, immigration policy pretty important to national security?
It absolutely is, Senator. And again, I wouldn't want to, again, that's the domain of Secretary Mayorkas. And I know that he and the interagency are continuing to work that very hard.
All right. According to CENTCOM press release, General, post-strike, this is a quote now, post-strike reflections indicate that Kabir Adi was directly connected to the ISIS-K leaders that coordinated the August 26th attack at the airport. The way I read that, the actual ISIS-K leaders who coordinated the attack are still out there. Is that true?
I prefer to talk about it in the private.
I thought you might. I look forward to that, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Kramer. Now let me recognize Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you.
Do they ever have a great deal to hide from not only the enemies, our adversaries, but do they ever have a great deal to hide from the American people? In other words, they'll answer their question, but only in a confined, close quarter to where it's not being recorded and it's tight security as far as what's being said and what's being done will be in wraps.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to say thank you. I just received a letter this morning in response to a letter I'd written to you and Secretary Blinken asking about the process of certifying that somebody did work for the DOD as a contractor. And I do want to say that the response is a good one. I think you've made with regards to Project Rabbit, which I'll give you a couple minutes to talk about, but it seems that you've reviewed over 7,800 employment records and matched over 3,400 of those pre-com applicants. Would you like to talk about Operation Rabbit just a little bit?
Well, only to say that, I mentioned earlier, Senator, that this, when this question came up, that this is important to us. We think we have to do everything we can to shorten the amount of time that it takes for somebody who's worked with us before to be able to verify that they have worked with us. We're going to continue to work on this, and again, one of my major directorates is focused on this, and we'll work with the committee on this if if you have further requirements. But thanks for your support in this regard. So.
Thank you. And I know each one of us probably does have folks who've contacted our office seeking help in verifying their employment as a contractor, not just under DOD, but also with state. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about Mark Frericks. Although military operations have ended, an Illinoisan and a veteran of the U.S. Navy, Mr. Mark Frericks is still being held hostage in Afghanistan. He was abducted in Kabul on January 31st of last year, and while he's been held captive too long, recent reporting in Newsweek indicates Taliban willingness to engage on his release. Anas Haqqani, a senior Taliban official, confirmed that U.S. and Taliban negotiators have discussed my constituent and said about the prospect of a deal to secure Mr. Frericks' freedom, quote, "There are attempts between the Political Bureau and the United States envoy, which we hope will be successful in this regard. We must continue to press for Mr. Frericks' swift and safe return. This must be a top priority for our government." And in August, a Pentagon spokesperson stated the DoD is laser focused on returning him home safely to his family and where he belongs. And Secretary Austin, I know from our numerous conversations, including just yesterday about my constituents, that you have been personally involved in attempting to secure his return, both in your engagements with your counterparts in the region and in your role as a member of the Principals Committee of the National Security Council. Can you please update me on your discussions regarding Mr. Frericks with your foreign counterparts, as well as your interagency partners in our government? And I know his family is probably watching this testimony today.
Well, this is, as you have indicated, Senator, I want him back. And, we're going to continue to do everything we can to get him back. As you and I have talked in other sessions, I've engaged the chief of the Pakistani Army on multiple occasions to solicit his help. I've engaged other senior leadership, Qataris, for example, to use their influence to see if they can help us there. We'll remain focused on this. This is. I'm hopeful that we can see some daylight, some movement here in the future. I don't have anything to offer you in terms of specific readouts from the interagency process, and I defer to Mr. Sullivan to provide commentary there. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Secretary, and I appreciate your commitment to getting Mr. Frericks home. I am, however, frustrated by how little information there has been made available to congressional staff and others when it comes to everyone who's trying to get allies out of Afghanistan. General Milley, I understand from public reporting that you've been working with some veterans groups and some other NGOs who have been voluntarily offering their help in the continued effort to evacuate Americans and at-risk Afghans from Afghanistan. Can you share any details with us and the public today about that effort?
Yeah, so what we did, Senator, is we did a little bit of outreach to some of the groups that are probably well known to folks in this room. Had them in for some sessions in the Defense Department to get coordinated so we could have a common operating picture of what SIVs, what P1, P2s, what American citizens, most importantly, are still there. Try to get the information in a singular database, et cetera, from the various groups. In addition to that, get them linked into Ambassador Bass. Because he is the single focal point with the Department of State, which we've done that now. And we have a joint staff general officer who's involved in that working group with them. And he's our liaison and brings them all together in order to get all the information, in order to develop courses of action to help bring out additional American citizens and others.
Thank you. Will you commit to communicating with me and all of Congress about this partnership, and so we can help facilitate the connections with these people who still remain at risk and are contacting us through our various offices?
I will. It is being run by the Department of State, but I will work with the Department of State to make sure that they get it over to you. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Let me recognize Senator Scott, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Milley, why would you, as the sitting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talk to a reporter that's writing a book about a prior administration? Why would that be part of your job description?
Well, as Senator Blackburn said earlier, I deal with the media routinely, 2, 3, 4 times a week. I'm talking to the media, and the media, whether it's books, TV news, reporters, we have a lot of media here. I think it's very, very important to make sure that senior officials talk to the media in all of its various forms in order to explain what we're doing.
But you're talking about what happened in the past.
Sure,
I
past.
mean, why would you do that? I mean, what's the upside to the American public of you talking to, you have all this sensitive information,
Sure.
you have a full-time job, and then you go out and talk about the prior administration? I just don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. If the media wants to ask you about what we're doing right now, something like that, I get it, but the prior administration, why would you do that?
I think it's important to make sure that the American people are transparent with what our government does, that's all. Nothing more complicated than that.
So it's been reported you discussed sensitive information, including private conversations you had with the prior president with these reporters. How is that consistent with your testimony today that you won't talk about any conversations you've had with the president? You only talk about what your position is. But it's been reported that by these reporters that you've told them exactly the conversations you had with the prior president. Does that seem inconsistent?
I'm not so sure about what they're reporting, about what I said, and private conversations, etc. I don't share private conversations with the president. With this president, former president, any president. Period.
So what these reporters are saying is completely untrue?
I'm not going to say whether I don't even know what they're written. I haven't read their books. But I can tell you that I don't share my personal conversations with the president. Period.
So Senator Sullivan was asking about this conversation about whether you would give prior notice to the military communist China that America's going to attack. So is it your testimony you will not ever give a heads up to the communist Chinese military if the president of the United States, it doesn't matter who the president is, that you're reporting to is ready to attack?
Of course I wouldn't.
And you don't feel like you did that, you said that at all?
The context we were talking about, Senator, there was a significant degree of intelligence, and I think I put the unclassified versions in that timeline. And it's not insignificant. It's not like one report or two. It's an entire body of intelligence that led us to believe that the Chinese were misinterpreting our actions and misinterpreting what was happening inside our own country politically, and they were assessing a situation that was leading to escalation, possible incident, and it would have been quite dangerous. So Secretary Esper and I met, and we met with other members of the team, and we developed an engagement plan to ensure that we engaged at various levels. Secretary Esper had his DASD do it, and he asked me to do it, so I did that. And I made a call, and the theme was to de-escalate, to lower tensions. And I believe that is a faithful and loyal execution of my constitutional responsibilities. And I believe that was faithfully executing the intent of the President of the United States at the time, because I knew with certainty that President Trump was not going to attack the Chinese just out of the blue. It wasn't going to happen. And if things did happen, there'd be periods of tension and calls going back and forth. So
one more question.
Sorry.
It's been reported that you had concerns about the prior president's fitness for office. Do you have a criteria for presidents, and have you reviewed the existing President Biden for his fitness for office, or do you think that way? Do you think you have the ability to have a right to make those decisions, and have you been doing that?
I'm not qualified to evaluate the mental fitness or the health of a former president, or anybody else, or anybody in this room. That's not my job. That's not what I do, and that's not what I did. There was a lot of speculation going on, but I don't evaluate people's health and fitness. That's not my job.
Okay. How did you feel when President Biden attacked the willingness of the Afghan military to fight? How did that make you feel?
How did I feel?
Yeah, when he went and attacked, he said he didn't think the Afghan military had the willingness to fight. How does that make you, as a military officer, how does that make you feel? I mean, something that you put your
I think the
life on the
Afghan
line.
military sacrifice. I mean, there's 60 or 70,000 Afghans that were killed in action over the last 20 years defending their country, and I thought, and I personally am witness to units that fought well and fought bravely and gave their life for their country. But I would also say at the same time that over the summer, in those 11 days, the vast majority of the Afghan units put their weapons down, and they surrendered without a fight. Kabul was taken with a couple hundred guys on motorcycles, and there wasn't a shot fired. So my question to myself is, how do we miss that? What happened? How did that happen? And that's one of the things we've got to figure out. How is it that an army of that size, that they were trained, they were manned, they were equipped, etc., how is it that the factors of will and leadership and morale just collapsed like that? And we have to answer that to ourselves. But the Afghan army fought for their country for 20 years and lost a lot of people.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Senator Scott, excuse me. Senator Rosen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here with us throughout this long day. You know, I just want to speak about how, as Americans, we are really frustrated, all of us, about the way we withdrew from Afghanistan, but we nonetheless understand the difficult position that you and our men and women in uniform on the ground were, the position you were in last month. So, what the American people fail to understand, however, and what I too have difficulty accepting, is the idea that the circumstances we found ourselves in were inevitable. So I'd like to ask about a few areas where perhaps we might have taken a different approach that could have given us more time to accomplish the mission. So General McKenzie, why was it always the responsibility of the U.S. and coalition forces or contractors to maintain Afghan aircraft and equipment? And why were the Afghan forces either not trained or not given this responsibility over the last 20 years?
So I think you begin with the basic technological literacy of the country, which began when we first had dealings with them in 2001. You know, you're talking to people who are coming out of rule by the Taliban, imposition of Sharia law, a Stone Age approach to these things. You cannot impose technological literacy quickly. So that's why it took a long time, and we were still not finished with the Afghan Air Force. And you know, there's a lot of contract maintenance done for a lot of air forces around the world. The Afghan Air Force is not unique in that regard, although in this case it was particularly telling because they were so dependent on it.
Once more, they was indoctrinated. They was indoctrinated with the Sharia law that the Saudi Arabians have been promoting now for several decades. And because they've got the money pertaining to the oil, they have been one of the most state-known sponsors of terrorism, worldwide terrorism throughout the planet. But once more, they have been indoctrinated. Once more, if you're trying to reform somebody, you cannot reform them from the outside in. The odds of that actually becoming successful is slim to none. You have to begin with the inside out. Just as Christ talked about the cup. You worry about the inside of the cup, and then the outside of the cup would take care of itself. That's where we failed. That's exactly where we failed. We didn't go in there with the leadership of the Holy Spirit and God the Creator, because we deviated, or they deviated from that whenever they decided that they was going to turn their back on the messenger that ever got the message started to begin with, that the world wasn't going to end by a nuclear holocaust, but it was going to end the way that the Bible predicted for it to end. They not only turned their back on the messenger, which is myself talking right now, but they also attacked him, or allowed for him to be attacked, allowed for these hardships to fall upon to the founder of the Windmill Ministries. Again and again and again, regardless whether it was in Tennessee in 2005 or in Tennessee in 2017, regardless whether it was in Kentucky in 2008 or Kentucky in 2010 or Kentucky in 2013, 2013, regardless whether it was out in Oklahoma in 2009. All these attempts was supposed to have stained, hurt, diminished the character of the founder of the ministry to the point that he would no longer have been successful in the inspiration that the Heavenly Father had given for him to succeed in. So in actuality, they wasn't fighting me. They wasn't fighting me. They was fighting the spirit that I was standing up and representing, or standing up to represent. The same way, and I've said this before in some of my other material, it's the same way with King Herod, that ordered for every male child to be beheaded during the time that he heard about this Jesus coming into the land. He didn't have nothing against Jesus. Jesus hadn't done nothing to this individual. Besides that, Jesus was just a little bitty baby, an infant, just barely born or was fixing to be born. So what did he have the beef against? He had the beef against the holy righteous spirit. The same spirit that was dwelling in Herod had a beef with the holy righteous spirit. And because of it, hey, I'm going to execute 4,000 or 5,000 children, even at the expense of killing my own people, to try to get rid of this Jesus. Because I know that this Jesus, towards who he is and what he stands for, I know who his God is going to be. If we know who the God of Abraham was, if we know who the God of Moses was, if we knew who the God of all these other prophets was, don't you think that King Herod at that time knew who the God of Jesus Christ was going to be? Sure he did. That's the reason why he was wanting to destroy him, to do away with him.
And so, understanding that, would it have been helpful to keep Bagram Air Base open in order to help with any of this going on, any of the evacuation, anybody else coming through the country, another place for our citizens, people from other countries, or special SIV holders, any of those folks?
Ma'am, I was intimately involved in all the decisions on Bagram, and in no way would Bagram have been able to contribute to either the effective use of the Afghan Air Force, its continued maintenance, or bringing people out. And I could, very briefly, I can tell you that once we went below 2,500 people in Afghanistan, we lost the ability to hold Bagram Air Base. And it was inevitable that we were going to have to come out of Bagram, because we ended up in late June, early July with 650 Marines and soldiers in the country. It was not feasible to hold Bagram under those circumstances. So we were driven by the plan, which we had all had an opportunity to work, that we were going to come out of Bagram. There's no way we were going to be able to keep Bagram and go to effective zero in Afghanistan. Just not possible.
Well, thinking of what we may have gained or may have lost as we leave, we think about countering adversaries. So again, General McKenzie, what is your assessment of the foreign influence in Afghanistan in the wake of our withdrawal, and what are the measures that we can take now to prevent our adversaries from filling the vacuum created by our departure?
Senator, last week I was in Kazakhstan, in the capital of Kazakhstan, Nur Sultan, where I hosted what we call the Casa-Chad Conference. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, the Kyrgyz Republic, and Pakistan. We all met and we talked about that region after the fall of Afghanistan. And generally, what they want is they want assurance. They want to continue to have ties with the United States, because they want alternatives to Russia and they want alternatives to China. Unfortunately, because of their geographic location, they are going to always have to deal with Russia and China. But I think our partners in the region want a message that the United States is not going to turn our back on them, even though we left Afghanistan. And we had a very productive two-day conference based on those themes.
Well, I couldn't agree more, because I think it makes us more vulnerable if we allow anyone else to fill that vacuum. I'd like to, in the just minute I have left, just touch briefly on the fate of Afghan women. What we've seen regarding the status of women in territories where the Taliban had retained control prior to overthrowing the Afghan government, we know how horrible the conditions are for women. And so, what do you see moving forward for the fate of Afghan women? What can we do? What do you see as the future for women's rights in Afghanistan?
During our long engagement in Afghanistan, I think we made great strides in educational and other opportunities for women in Afghanistan. I think those are all now gravely at risk with the return of the Taliban. So the levers that we have are economic and diplomatic, which are not part of the Department of Defense. And I think that's how we have to work the problem. And I do think there is opportunity. It will not be a long-lived opportunity, a matter of months perhaps, where we can force the Taliban down a certain path based on their desire to have international financing, international recognition, the release of sanctions, and other things that are very important to them. So I think we've got to be very hard-nosed as we negotiate with them going forward to ensure these gains are not lost.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the hearing today, and I'll be submitting more questions for the record.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I want to come back to you. We discussed that you have had conversations with Woodward, Costa, Leonig, Rucker, and Bender on their books, correct?
Not Coster.
You did not on Costa. Well,
Not Coster.
Social media.
Woodward, yes, and others.
We'll leave that as a point of discussion. Okay, in any of these conversations, did you discuss private meetings with the president or White House officials?
White House officials, perhaps. President, I don't think so.
So you never discussed any of your conversations with President Trump?
With President Trump.
With any of these officers?
Not a private conversation.
Okay. Did you portray the commander-in-chief in a negative light or make comments that were critical of the commander-in-chief to any of these authors with which you had conversations?
Not my comments or my observations, no. Others that were relayed to me from others,
Okay.
perhaps.
Well, I'm looking forward to your book report on
Great.
this. Would you see these conversations as an abuse of executive privilege?
I would not know.
You would not. Okay. Let me ask you this. What is your standard for determining when to leak private conversations with the president?
I don't leak private conversations with the president.
You did not. So you had these conversations with the authors, but you don't see that as leaking information to which they were not entitled to know. See, this is the problem that we have. See, as a member of this committee and as someone who represents a lot of our men and women in uniform that are there, as we've referenced today, I've really got an issue with the fact that you will talk to authors, but then you all come in here and you say, well, we can't tell you what we told the president, and then I have to drag it out of you that the written documents, which under Article 2, you're supposed to give those to us. You can't go hide behind somebody's skirts on this, and you don't want to give those to us. So you've repeatedly told this committee that you will not reveal your private conversations with President Biden, but then you've leaked this information from your meetings with President Trump. So it is important to us that you truthfully respond to us on this. And I think what you did with making time to talk to these authors, burnishing your image, kind of, building that bluster, but then not putting the focus on Afghanistan and what was happening there. General Milley, that is really disappointing to me. I know it's disappointing to people that have served with you or under your command, and it does not serve our nation well. You talked a little bit earlier about the damage, and you said damage was the right word to use when assessing what has happened in Afghanistan when you look at America's credibility. So how do you look the men and women in the eye that have served under your command? How do you look young men in the eye that are coming to our military academy days and who want to serve and say, you can depend on me, I've got your back? Because you know what? I think a lot of these families right now, they don't feel like you have your back. The special ops guys I met with Friday in my office in Nashville that are taking their time, their money, and risking their lives to do a job that the three of you could not do. Maybe we're going to remember you three as the three that broke the military. I don't know. But this is causing just a lot of anger from people who have trusted the military. They have felt like the military was one of the most trustworthy institutions. But in order to get a name in a book, in order to not be drawn into a political fight, what you have managed to do
is to politicize the U.S. military, to downgrade our reputation with our allies. Nobody has resigned. Nobody has submitted their resignation. And we've got thousands of people watching this hearing today that are looking at you all and saying, I can't believe they're sitting there and not answering the questions and are trying to punt. I yield back.
Thank you. Now let me recognize Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to ask some questions. At the time, because we were short on time, I didn't have the opportunity to thank all three of you, General Milley, Secretary Austin, General McKenzie, for your service to our country, serving in combat overseas, multiple deployments. Your family has served as well, all of your families, and I want to thank you personally for that. It is a big commitment. I understand it. Secretary Austin, since U.S. troops departed Kabul on August 31st, the number of evacuation flights has been very small. The State Department briefed on Friday that only 4 charter flights have departed with U.S. support, and the ability to leave by a land route is even less right now. The testimony today has indicated that the mission of facilitating evacuation for Americans and vulnerable Afghans is ongoing. Can you explain what role the military has in ongoing evacuation efforts being led by the State Department?
You are correct, Senator. It is led by the State Department, and it is an interagency effort. And so, as General Milley and I said earlier, we do have a senior officer participating in that cell that's run by Ambassador Bass, and they're reaching out to a number of different entities, veterans groups, many of your colleagues who have information that can be helpful in contacting people who have a desire to get out and have the right credentials. And if they don't have the right credentials, are there things that we can do to help them obtain those credentials if they've helped us, work with us in the past, or if they're an American citizen with expired credentials?
And do you anticipate there will be transport from third countries? Many of our Afghan allies have left and now find themselves in a third country. Should we expect that there'll be flights out of those places as well?
I think those individuals, as they work with our embassy personnel in those various countries, to help us help them again if they qualify as one of the people who helped us in the past. Certainly, either taking a routine commercial flight or taking a chartered flight that we can help sponsor. I do anticipate there'll be some sort of activity in the future. But again, I don't want to speak for the State Department. I will tell you, Senator, that from a DoD perspective, we're going to do everything we can to help enable this effort.
Throughout this evacuation effort, my office worked closely with groups of former Afghan pilots and women who served, in addition to American citizens and veterans, working to assist them in leaving the country. These are men and women who trained with us, who fought with us, and who are at heightened risk because of it. So I'm concerned that they were not a priority in our evacuation efforts, and that guidance on immigration options for them has been inadequate. Due to the challenges and uncertainties of accessing evacuation flights, many Afghan evacuees sought alternative means of escape, flying to these third-party countries, as I mentioned. How is the Defense Department working with state right now to ensure that these individuals don't fall through the cracks with regards to resettlement?
There is none.
Again, I'd have to defer to state in terms of outlining what the resettlement processes are. But in terms of direct activity from the Department of Defense, we don't have much. We're not a big part of that effort, the resettlement effort in third countries. Excuse me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And again, I want to thank all three of you for being here today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Senator Kelly. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I've just got one more question for you about these many book interviews that you did. I Alone Can Fix It's one book, Perils, another book. Frankly, we did win this election. The inside story of how Trump lost is the third book. Seems like that's a significant outlay of time.
I don't think so. I think that
They were short interviews?
Relatively short. I don't think it took an excessive amount of time.
What was the time frame on these interviews for these three different books? These are deep, by the way. These are for folks who don't know at home. You said you didn't read the books. I don't think most people probably do. These are DC Insider tell-all type books. But what was the time frame? Did you say that you were doing these interviews?
I would say it took a couple of hours, maybe.
But when? What's the time frame? When were you sitting for them? Dates.
I can get you the dates. I don't know.
This year?
Off the top of my head, but I'll get you the dates.
2021?
Oh, yeah.
So it was this calendar year?
I think so, yeah. Sure.
Well, I just am wondering, clearly this is a priority for you. You did these on the record, by the way? All these interviews are on the record? These reporters, they quote you?
I do interviews on the record, off the record, and I do background interviews. And I do all of that with print media, television media, books, documentaries, all kinds of things.
I thought, why would you do background and off the record interviews? Background means you can't quote you. Background and off the record interviews if the goal is transparency.
The transparency goes to the fact to make sure that we are explaining ourselves and make sure that these authors have correct information.
Not attributable
let's take
to you.
Woodward, for example. Probably 200 people interviewed, and they approach my guys to say, are these facts true? This is what we heard. We clarify and mitigate any incorrect information.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're doing these interviews, you're doing them in 2021. It just makes me wonder, all of these different books, were you maybe a little distracted? Maybe a little distracted about what was going on in Afghanistan? Here's why I'm asking. General Miller testified to this committee that he warned about the rapid erosion of the military situation in Afghanistan as early as March of 2021. He further testified that he informed you about his view on this. He also testified that he said that the collapse of the Afghan security forces and the Afghan government could come very fast in 2021.
Hard and fast.
And he said that he informed you this. He also said that he informed Secretary Austin of this.
He did.
Now, at the same time, however, in June, you were saying, and I quote you now, an outright takeover by the Taliban is unlikely. That's at an Armed Services Committee meeting in the House, June 23rd. In July, you said the Afghan security forces have the capacity to sufficiently fight and defend their country. You also said that they were well equipped. On June 17th, you told the Senate Appropriations Committee the Afghan government had a 325 to 350,000 person security force, which we now know is a drastic overestimate. A few days later, you lowered that to 300,000. Which we still know is a drastic overestimate. Your generals on the ground, your commander on the ground is saying one thing. The Taliban has a massive offensive underway from May 1st on. But yet you told us very different things in public. Well, how do you reconcile those things? What am I missing?
Well, first of all, Scott Miller did say hard and fast. And he also meant that, at least to me and to others, that he meant that to be in the fall, October, November, maybe even December timeframe.
I heard you say that earlier.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. I have to tell you, that wasn't his testimony to this committee.
Well, what he said in the committee was hard and fast. He didn't put a date on it. Is the readouts to me? I don't know. Did he put a date on it?
No, he didn't put a date on it.
But he did
put a date on it. That's what intrigues me.
But he did put a date on it with me and to us. And when pressed, it was after we leave. That was point one, which was 31 August, and probably into the October timeframe, maybe Thanksgiving. And that is about more or less where many of the intel assessments were.
He said he was a dissenter on the intel
he did.
assessment.
That's right.
And he didn't put any of those qualifiers on his testimony to us. So are you saying he shifted his testimony, General Miller, that he wasn't?
No, I'm saying what he told me was it was likely to be in the October timeframe. The intel assessments are centering around November, Thanksgiving at the latest, Christmas. Some intel assessments went into the next year. Here's my point, Senator. Is the intel assessments had two basic things, in my view, was the scale and scope plus the speed. All the intel assessments, all of us, got that wrong. There's no question about it. That was a swing and a miss on the intel assessment of 11 days in August. There's nobody that called that.
Well, can I just, General, my time is about, I appreciate that you've made these points. I don't mean to cut you off. It's just that my time is about to expire. I just want to say this. It seems to me that you put a high priority on making sure that you were favorably portrayed by the DC press corps. You spent a lot of time doing that. Fair enough if that's your priority, but at the same time, we had a rapidly deteriorating, frankly, disastrous situation in Afghanistan, which resulted in the death of 13 soldiers, including one from my home state, hundreds of civilians and hundreds of Americans left behind. And in my view, that mission can't be called a success in any way, shape, or form, logistical or otherwise. General, I think you should resign. Secretary Austin, I think you should resign. I think this mission was a catastrophe. I think there's no other way to say it, and there has to be accountability. I respectfully submit it should begin with you.
Senator,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, you've spoken today.
I told you a while ago that they're pulling for they're on a witch hunt right now. They're pulling for straws. Everybody wants to blame everybody else except the people that should stand up and be accountable for what happened. I'm going to end right there with that.
A lot about Savit.
I want to go back and look at something real quick so I can tally this particular message up that I'm putting out to my viewers. Just bear with me for a second. I think the woman from Tennessee made a good stance there in what she was saying.
1900, something like that. And then we made the changes and submitted them. And yes, we were late.
Right in here is where I want to be.
Then why did the committee not get the testimony for today until 10:35 last night? Were you guys not prepared?
We were prepared, and again, I don't know the specifics of what last minute adjustments were being made at what level, but we were prepared.
Well, it must not have been a level below you then, or you'd be aware of it, right? So it would have to be a level above you. In other words, did the White House withhold your testimony? General Milley, did you have your testimony done before 10:35 last night?
We did, but the White House wasn't withholding my testimony, no.
Who was?
Nobody. I mean, you have to submit, when you submit written documents, as you well know, you have to submit them to OMB.
Right.
They reviewed them in the afternoon. We got them back, I don't know, 1900, something like that. And then we made the changes and submitted them. And yes, we were late.
But it wasn't you.
No,
it was OMB.
The intent to block.
Yeah. It was somebody's strategy, is my guess. Just might not have been yours, but it clearly was somebody's. General McKenzie, about a half hour ago, you said, we know for certain ISIS intends to attack us at home, or something to that effect, right? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So 20 years ago on September 11th, when the terrorist hijackers took over 4 aircraft and attacked the homeland, all of them came here on a visa, correct? Now, in the last 20 years, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, they haven't acquired ICBMs or a Navy or an Air Force as far as we know. So if they are going to carry out that intent, they're going to have to get here themselves. And that means either through a visa program or as refugees across the southern border. My question to all of you is, isn't national security tied directly to good immigration security? And do you feel like we're adequately prepared to protect the homeland from visa holders and refugees?
Senator, in the case of ISIS, I think we've done a remarkable job over the last 2 decades about hardening the entry process and making it very difficult for them to get their agents into the United States. And that's a matter of record just based on performance. The same thing with AQ. The larger discussion about immigration, I defer to the Secretary and the Department.
Well, I would submit to you that as good as the work's been done in the last 20 years, the last 6 or 7 months, it's been pretty well degraded, I would say. Others, immigration policy pretty important to national security?
It absolutely is, Senator. And again, I wouldn't want to, again, that's the domain of Secretary Mayorkas. And I know that he and the interagency continue to work that very hard.
All right. According to CENTCOM press release, General, this is a quote. Now, post-strike reflections indicate that Kabirati was directly connected to the ISIS-K leaders that coordinated the August 26th attack at the airport. The way I read that, the actual ISIS-K leaders who coordinated the attack are still out there. Is that true?
I prefer to talk about it in private.
I thought you might. I look forward to that, and I yield back. ISIS-K leaders who coordinated the attack are still out there. Is that true?
I prefer to talk about it in private.
I thought you might. I look at leaders that coordinated the strike. This is a quote. Now, post-strike reflections indicate that Kabirati was directly connected to the ISIS-K leaders that coordinated the August 26th attack at the airport. The way I read that, the actual ISIS-K leaders who coordinated the attack are still out there. Is that true?
I prefer to talk about it in private.
I thought you might.
I want to end it right there. That's the point that I was trying to make. It's very obvious, and I said a while ago that not only do they have things to hide from the enemy, but they are obviously hiding stuff from the general public and not elaborating of the truth pertaining to what they know now, who actually sponsored, masterminded, and pursued the attack upon to the American people during 9/11. And of course, the question comes to my mind is how come certain departments in Homeland Security was aware of an imminent attack the day before 9/11, but the information failed to get to the right people so that they could take proper measures in making sure that they could combat this particular attack or breach that was fixing to happen, that was going to turn our lives totally upside down. That's the whole part that I was trying to make a while ago, is that they know something in regards to people that is still not being held accountable for the horrors that we've all had to go through. They know it, and they're not exposing the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help them God. And because of that, I tend to wonder if this isn't just some sort of a game. No wonder the congressman or the senator there from Tennessee spoke the way that she did towards people being upset and people having harsh feelings against what has happened here. No wonder she got directly in that guy's face and pointing her finger towards explaining to him through her towards how the rest of the people generally feels about what has went on here. I'm going to end this because I got things to do today. I feel like that you've gotten enough from this particular recording, that you pretty well got some sort of an ideal in regards to all this terrorism stuff and accountability stuff, that obviously they're hee-hawing around. They're not getting directly to the facts. And I still think that the core of origin doesn't just begin and end with the 9 attack, but you got to go a decade in front of the 9 attack to how things unfolded with Desert Storm and Desert Shield. And I was under the influence that the whole primary reason for us ever going to war with Saddam Hussein wasn't so much that we believed that he had mass bombs of mass destruction. It wasn't the fact that we thought that how that he was treating his people was brutal or unjust. It wasn't the fact that we was trying to combat the axis of evil or to bring stability to that region. The whole primary purpose is what I was told, is that there was a threat that come directly from Saddam Hussein towards Mr. Senior Bush of a imminent threat, and because of it, they didn't take it lightly, and that's what initiated our attack towards them during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. I don't know how true that is. That's strictly only hearsay, and I don't know how that you can go about getting the truth in that matter, but that's what I was told by various people And also, I've heard it talked about on TV through various commentators that has interviewed various people that that was the primary reason in behind going to war with Saddam Hussein. Good luck to all of us as we enter program. God bless our troops. God bless America. And good luck to all of us in Shalom. Boy, hasn't this costed. Monetarily, physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, hasn't it costed?